What happens when two powerhouse women in entertainment collide not over gossip, but over the soul of music itself? The tension in the air could have been sliced with a diamond when Gladys Knight, the legendary Empress of Soul, sat down with Queen Latifah for what was built as a warm, celebratory interview about her lifetime in music. What the audience got instead was one of the most unforgettable, combustible on-air clashes in talk show history. A moment that ended with Gladys doing something she had never done in her decades-long career, walking off set mid-interview. The segment began like a love letter to legacy. Queen Latifah, poised and glowing beneath the studio lights, leaned forward with a smile that had introduced 1,000 interviews. "Gladys Knight, the Empress of Soul herself," she said. "Thank you so much for being here. Growing up, your music was the soundtrack of my life, my mother's life too." Gladys returned the warmth with her signature grace, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you, Dana. It's always special to sit down with another artist who truly understands the journey." The first few minutes flowed smoothly. Stories of the early days with the Pips, the thrill of breaking into radio, the struggle of being a black woman in an industry that often wanted her voice but not her vision. The audience hung on every word. Then the tone shifted. Queen Latifah tilted her head, choosing her words carefully. "You've managed to stay relevant through so many eras. But if I can ask directly, there have been reports about some tension between you and younger artists, that some feel older legends sometimes look down on them." Gladys's smile froze. "Not hostile, just careful. I'm not sure what you mean by tension. I've always believed in lifting up young artists, especially young black women, finding their voice." Queen Latifah pressed gently but firmly. "Well, there was that interview where you said R&B today lacks the authenticity of your era. Some took that as you dismissing the artistry of newer singers." The energy in the room shifted, subtly but unmistakably. The crew felt it. The audience leaned forward. Gladys's voice was calm but carried steel. "I think people misunderstand what I said. I never dismissed anyone's artistry. I simply said the industry has changed, not always for the better. Back then, we had to prove ourselves night after night. No filters, no auto-tune, no shortcuts." Queen Latifah raised a brow. "But surely you're not saying technology or social media takes away from talent, right?" Gladys's tone sharpened just slightly. "I'm saying that when you can become famous from a 15-second clip, when every note can be fixed in post-production, the relationship between an artist and their craft changes. That's not judgment, that's observation." The crowd murmured, sensing the crackling tension. Queen Latifah didn't back down. "But doesn't that sound a little elitist? Like you're gatekeeping what counts as real artistry?" Gladys let out a short, humorless laugh. "Elitist, Dana? I grew up in the projects of Atlanta. I've been performing since I was 8 years old. Every ounce of respect I've earned came from sweat, not status. If holding this industry to a higher standard makes me elitist, then I'll wear that proudly." The host shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't mean to offend you. I just think the industry has evolved." "Evolved?" Gladys interrupted, her voice suddenly powerful enough to silence the room. "When young girls are told they have to be half-naked to sell records. When lyrics have become so vulgar I can't play them around my grandbabies. When shows reward gimmicks over talent. That's not evolution, baby. That's devolution." The room went still. Even the studio lights seemed to dim. Latifah paused, her professional composure beginning to show strain. "But there are talented artists today, real ones who are breaking barriers." "Of course there are," Gladys said. "But they're drowning in a sea of noise. And when someone like me calls that out, we're called bitter or out of touch. I'm not out of touch. I'm experienced. There's a difference." The words landed like thunder. Queen Latifah, now visibly unsettled, leaned back. "But don't you think every generation deserves its own sound? I mean, older artists once said the same about hip-hop. Even you probably heard that." Gladys's eyes met hers, unwavering. "The difference is hip-hop came from truth, from pain, from purpose. What too much of today's music comes from is marketing. And baby, there's a big difference between soul and strategy." There was a long silence, a heavy final dot. And then Gladys Knight, the Empress of Soul, slowly rose from her chair. The audience gasped. "Dana, I love you," she said softly. "But I won't sit here and pretend that mediocrity is progress." With that, she removed her microphone, handed it to a stunned stagehand, and walked off set. The clip went viral within hours. Millions of views. Endless debates. Some called her out of touch. Others called her the last truth-teller in music. But one thing was certain, Gladys Knight hadn't just walked off a talk show. She'd walked straight into history, on her own terms. One last time. When I was coming up, Gladys began, her tone low but charged with memory. Hip-hop was revolutionary. It gave voice to people who'd never been heard. It was raw. It was real. It was necessary. She paused, her eyes flashing under the studio lights. But what's revolutionary about a computer doing half the work for you? The audience murmured. The tension in Queen Latifah's studio was now thick enough to feel, a hum of unease beneath the polished calm of a daytime set. Queen Latifah straightened in her chair, her smile thinning. But Gladys, with all due respect, she countered evenly, don't you think you're romanticizing the past a bit? The music industry's always had its problems. There were plenty of manufactured acts back in your day, too. For the first time, the legendary composure that had carried Gladys Knight through half a century of interviews began to crack. Manufactured acts? She repeated, her voice rising. Dana, are you really going to sit there and compare the Supremes, the Temptations, Martha, and the Vandellas to what's being passed off as music today? Her eyes blazed. Those artists sang. They performed. They had something to say. Queen Latifah didn't back down. And you don't think today's artists have something to say? What about Beyoncé, Alicia Keys, even Lizzo, who's pushing self-love and body positivity? That did it. Gladys leaned forward sharply. Don't you dare lecture me about Beyoncé, she snapped, the sweetness gone from her tone. That girl has more talent in her little finger than most of these so-called artists have in their entire bodies. The audience gasped. Gladys didn't pause. But even Beyoncé gets caught in this machine. The one that demands she be more provocative, more controversial, more marketable. It's heartbreaking to watch. Queen Latifah's expression hardened. So what you're saying, she's selling out? I'm saying, Gladys replied, gripping the arms of her chair, that this industry forces everyone to sell out to some degree. And when veterans like me point that out, we're called bitter, jealous, washed up, like we can't handle that our time is over. Queen Latifah raised a hand, trying to stay calm. Nobody called you washed up, Gladys. I didn't. Gladys fixed her with a stare that could have cut through glass. No. Then what do you call it when you sit here and imply I'm elitist for having standards? What are you really saying, Dana? That my opinion doesn't matter because I come from another era? The host shifted in her seat, visibly uneasy. That's not what I meant, and I think you know that. Gladys leaned forward, her voice low but thunderous. Do I? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you brought me here not to celebrate my legacy, but to challenge it, to make me look like some bitter old woman who can't handle change. The audience was silent. The cameras kept rolling. Every breath in the room felt like it might be the last before the explosion. Queen Latifah held her ground, though her tone softened. Gladys, that's not what this is. I didn't intend for the conversation to take this turn. I have nothing but respect for what you've done for music. Gladys gave a cold, bitter laugh. Your respect, Dana? I was headlining world tours before you were even born. I've won Grammys, been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, sold millions of records. I don't need your respect. I've earned it from generations who know what real artistry sounds like. Queen Latifah's face tightened, her professionalism beginning to crack. And there it is, she shot back. The very attitude younger artists complain about. That because you came first, your art somehow matters more. Gladys's voice rose dangerously. You want to talk about attitude? How about inviting me on your show under false pretenses? How about ambushing a guest with gotcha questions just to stir up a headline? Nobody ambushed you, Gladys, Queen Latifah said, her voice straining to stay composed. These are legitimate questions about comments you made publicly and taken out of context. Gladys fired back. Just like you're doing right now. I never said young artists don't work hard. I said the industry doesn't honor their work or the music the way it used to. But you don't want nuance. You want sound bites. You want drama. I'm trying to have an honest conversation, Queen Latifah snapped, her patience thinning. Honest? Gladys stood abruptly. The studio erupted in shocked whispers as her chair rolled backward. There's nothing honest about this ambush. You brought me here to play the villain in your little narrative about old versus new. Well, congratulations, Dana. You've got your moment. Queen Latifah stood too, her patience finally snapping. You know what, Gladys? Maybe this is the problem. Maybe you just can't handle being challenged because you're so used to everyone kissing your ring. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Even the camera crew froze. The audience, silent, breathless, watched as two icons stood locked in a standoff that no one had seen coming. Gladys Knight, the Empress of Soul herself, who had stared down segregation, sexism, and half a century of industry politics, looked at Queen Latifah with a gaze sharp enough to cut through glass. "Kissing my ring," Gladys repeated slowly, her voice low, dangerous. "Is that what you think this is about?" She took a step forward, her tone rising with every word. "Ego. Status. Let me tell you something, little girl. I've been fighting for respect in this business since before you even knew what a recording studio was. I never, not once, asked anyone to kiss anything of mine." Queen Latifah's jaw tightened. "Then why can't you accept that the industry has moved on, that it's evolved beyond what you represent?" Gladys shot back instantly. "Because in some ways it hasn't evolved, it's devolved. Back then, substance mattered more than spectacle. You had to actually sing to be called a singer. Music was about connecting souls, not moving units." Queen Latifah threw up her hands, her tone sharp. "And there it is again. The same elitist gatekeeping wrapped up in nostalgia. You talk like excellence is your property. If wanting excellence makes me elitist, then I'll wear that crown proudly," Gladys fired back. "If believing that an artist should be able to sing without a machine makes me a gatekeeper, then I'll guard that gate all day long. And if thinking music should elevate instead of degrade makes me old-fashioned, then baby, I'll wear that badge with honor." The studio was electric now, the kind of tension that vibrates in the air, waiting to break. Queen Latifah exhaled sharply, her voice hardening. "Gladys, I think you're living in a fantasy if you believe everything was perfect back then. There were scandals, payola schemes, artists being robbed blind by their labels. Racism, sexism, worse than anything happening now." Gladys's eyes narrowed to slits. "A fantasy?" she repeated, each syllable heavy. "You think what I lived through was a fantasy?" She took another step toward her host. "Dana, I performed in venues where I couldn't use the same bathroom as the white audience who came to see me sing. I signed contracts that paid me pennies while white executives got rich off my voice. I was told I was too dark, too soulful, too real to ever make it mainstream. Don't you dare call what my generation endured a fantasy." The silence that followed was deafening. Queen Latifah's voice, when it came, was icy. "I'm not minimizing what you went through. I'm saying maybe your view is shaped by survivorship bias. You made it, so you assumed the system worked." Gladys blinked once slowly, as if she couldn't believe what she'd just heard. "Survivorship bias," she echoed, her tone laced with disbelief. "You think I'm standing here because of luck? Because the system worked?" Her voice rose, commanding, resonant, the voice that had filled arenas for decades. "Every inch of success I earned came from talent, from discipline, from refusing to sell my soul for convenience or approval. Something this generation doesn't seem to value anymore. Not when you can fake depth with a filter and a hook." The blow landed. Queen Latifah's expression hardened, her voice trembling with anger. "Are you saying my career was manufactured? That I didn't earn my place in this industry?" Gladys studied her for a long, loaded moment, then spoke softly, cuttingly. "I'm saying your generation had advantages. My generation built the doors you walked through. We kicked them open with blood and sweat and grace. And now here you stand using that platform to challenge the very people who made it possible for you to be here." "I'm not tearing anyone down," Queen Latifah fired back. "I'm asking legitimate questions about your comments, about your criticisms of modern artists." Gladys's voice cut through hers like thunder. "Legitimate questions." She turned toward the cameras, her tone swelling to a commanding crescendo. "You call this legitimacy, twisting my words, painting me as bitter because I dare to defend real artistry. That's not journalism. That's entertainment disguised as provocation." Her voice filled every inch of the room. Every microphone, every stunned silence for a heartbeat. Neither woman spoke. Then Gladys leaned in close enough for her words to strike like a final note. "You wanted a viral moment, Dana. Congratulations. You just got one." Queen Latifah stood frozen, microphone trembling slightly in her hand. Across from her, Gladys Knight, the Empress of Soul herself, rose from her chair with deliberate, regal calm. "You brought me here," Gladys began, her voice measured but seething beneath the surface, "under the guise of honoring my legacy. But from the moment this interview started, it's been one long attempt to paint me as a bitter relic who can't appreciate modern talent." She took a step closer, eyes locked on Latifah. "That's not journalism, Dana. That's character assassination disguised as conversation." Queen Latifah's composure cracked like thin glass. "You know what, Gladys? Maybe the problem isn't the questions I'm asking. Maybe the problem is that you can't handle being held accountable for your words. You've been put on a pedestal for so long that you've forgotten what it feels like to be challenged. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. Gladys stood perfectly still. Her face was unreadable, her poise unbroken. But when she spoke, her tone carried the quiet thunder of 6 decades spent fighting for every ounce of respect she had earned. "Accountable for my words," she repeated softly. "Let me tell you something about accountability, young lady. I've been held accountable for every note I've sung, every performance I've given, every interview I've sat through. I've been judged by critics, by fans, by an industry that dissected my every breath. I don't need to be reprimanded by someone who invited me into her house just to disrespect me." Queen Latifah folded her arms. "Disrespect. I'm trying to have a real conversation, something deeper than the usual fluff piece where everyone just smiles and nods." Gladys's eyes narrowed. "A real conversation involves respect for your guest. It means listening, not waiting for your next gotcha line. It means understanding that disagreeing with modern trends doesn't make someone a bitter has-been." "But that's exactly how you sound," Latifah shot back, her voice rising despite herself. "Like you're angry. The spotlight's moved on. Like you're resentful that it's not your time anymore." That did it. The words hit the air like a gunshot. Gladys Knight, who had endured segregation, industry exploitation, and decades of sexism without ever lowering her crown, stood there trembling, not with rage but with disbelief. "My time has passed," she echoed, her voice now barely above a whisper. "Dana, let me explain something to you about time." She stepped forward, her presence commanding, the studio lights catching the silver in her hair like a halo. "Legends don't have a time that passes. Icons don't have expiration dates. I'm not yesterday's news, clinging to relevance. I am living history, and I deserve better than this ambush pretending to be an interview." She unclipped her microphone, the small click echoing louder than applause ever could. "Gladys, wait," Queen Latifah pleaded, taking a step forward. "Please, let's start over. We just got off track." Gladys paused at the edge of the set, turning back one last time, her silhouette framed in the glow of the stage lights. "Start over," she said quietly. "Some things can't be started over. Some words can't be taken back. Some disrespect can't be undone." She drew a deep breath. "I've spent 60 years in this business, and I've never walked out of an interview, but I've also never been so thoroughly disrespected by someone who should know better." Latifah's voice cracked with desperation. "You're really going to walk out over a disagreement about the music industry?" Gladys looked at her, unflinching. "I'm walking out because you brought me here under false pretenses, for ratings, not respect. Because you've shown complete disregard for the legacy you claim to honor. And because sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is refuse to participate in her own humiliation." With that, Gladys Knight turned and walked off the set, her head high, her dignity untouchable. Queen Latifah stood frozen, surrounded by stunned silence. The audience didn't clap. The crew didn't move. Cameras captured her face, part disbelief, part regret, as the reality of what had just unfolded settled over the room. In that moment, the clash between generations had become something bigger, a battle between legacy and modernity, reverence and reinvention. And as the clip went viral, one question echoed louder than any note sung that day.